Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be dealing with crazy neighbors when I inherited my great-grandfather's farm 3 years ago. The 80-acre property had been in our family since 1924, and I'd always loved visiting as a kid. When I took it over, I modernized the operation into something that actually made money. Heritage breed livestock and organic vegetables for high-end restaurants in the city about an hour away. It wasn't traditional farming, but it honored the land while keeping the bills paid. The farm sits in a beautiful rural valley with rolling hills and a creek running through the back pasture. My great-grandmother had planted a wildflower meadow near the front of the property that bloomed every spring with native flowers. It was absolutely gorgeous and held so many childhood memories of running through those flowers with my cousins during family visits. When I inherited the place, the first thing I did was get a complete land survey done. The old property markers were mostly gone, so I had the surveyor place permanent iron stakes at all the corners and key points along the boundaries. Cost me a pretty penny, but I wanted everything legally documented and crystal clear. The survey showed exactly what I expected. The property ran from the county road back about half a mile, with the main farmhouse sitting roughly in the middle. Life was peaceful for the first 2.5 years. Then the trouble started when the old Johnson farm next door got sold and subdivided. The new owners built this massive modern house that looked completely out of place among all the traditional farmhouses and barns in the area. It was one of those cookie-cutter McMansions you see in suburban developments, all sharp angles and fake stone facades. The new neighbors were a couple in their 50s. The woman had this perfectly styled blonde hair and always wore expensive-looking clothes even when she was just checking her mailbox. Her husband seemed nice enough, but clearly let his wife run the show. I heard from other neighbors that she'd been the president of some notorious homeowners association in the city before they moved out here. I tried to be friendly when they first moved in, brought over some fresh eggs and vegetables as a welcome gift. The woman thanked me but made several comments about how quaint farm life was and how she was looking forward to improving the rural aesthetic of the area. Should have been a red flag right there. The problem started about 6 months after they moved in. I'd been away for a long weekend attending a sustainable agriculture conference, learning about new techniques for heritage breed management. When I got back late Sunday evening, I was exhausted and just wanted to get inside and crash. But as I drove up my driveway, something caught my eye in the headlights. There was a line of wooden stakes and bright orange surveyor flags cutting straight across my front pasture. The line started at the county road and ran directly toward the new neighbor's house, cutting right through the middle of my great-grandmother's wildflower meadow. I sat in my truck staring at it for a solid minute, trying to process what I was seeing. My first thought wasn't anger, but confusion. Maybe the county was planning some kind of utility work, or the phone company needed to run new lines. I went inside and checked my mail and email for any official notices about easements or scheduled work on my property. Nothing. Not a single piece of correspondence about anyone having permission to do anything on my land. I figured I'd call the county office first thing Monday morning to find out what was going on, but I didn't get the chance. Monday morning, around 7 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of heavy machinery. I looked out my bedroom window and nearly fell over. There was a bulldozer and a small excavator working along the flagged line, scraping and grading my pasture. They were moving fast, like they wanted to get as much done as possible before anyone could stop them. I threw on clothes and boots and ran outside. The crew had already torn up about 200 feet of the meadow, leaving ugly brown scars in the earth where delicate wildflowers had been growing just the day before. I was furious, but tried to keep my cool as I approached the foreman. "Excuse me?" I called out over the noise of the machinery. "What exactly are you doing here?" The foreman, a weathered guy in a hard hat, looked confused by my question. "We're putting in a new driveway for the homeowner. Got the work order right here." He pulled out a clipboard and showed me a sheet with the neighbor woman's name on it. "This is my property," I told him. "You're tearing up my land without permission." The foreman looked even more confused now. "Ma'am, we were hired by the lady in that house over there." He pointed toward the McMansion. "She said this was all approved and legal." I looked over and saw my neighbor standing on her back deck, coffee mug in hand, watching the destruction with what I can only describe as a smug smile. She even gave me a little wave when our eyes met. I marched over to her property line and called up to her deck. "We need to talk right now. Your crew is destroying my land." She walked down from her deck with this casual, dismissive attitude that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand like I was being ridiculous. "That winding driveway the developer gave us is completely impractical. This is obviously the most direct route. We're actually improving the whole area." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't your property to improve. This land has been in my family for almost a century. I have the deed and survey to prove it. You need to stop this immediately." She actually laughed at me. "Look, I'm not interested in your family history or whatever. This is simple common sense. We can have our lawyers work out the paperwork details later. Right now, you're trespassing on my construction site and interfering with my workers." The audacity was breathtaking. She was calling me a trespasser on my own land while her crew destroyed property that had been in my family for generations. I told her in no uncertain terms that she was the one trespassing and that I was calling the police. "Go ahead," she said with a smirk. "I'll call them too." And that's exactly what she did. While I was walking back toward the construction crew to tell them they needed to stop immediately, I heard her on the phone behind me. She was speaking loudly enough that I could catch most of what she was saying. "Yes, I need police at my address immediately. There's a man on my property threatening my construction workers. He's acting very aggressively and claiming he owns my land. I'm honestly scared for my safety. Please hurry." I couldn't believe she was painting me as the dangerous one when she was the one who had invaded my property with heavy machinery. But I stayed calm and focused on documenting everything. I took photos of the damage, the survey flags, and the equipment. I also called my lawyer and left a message explaining the situation. 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up. They initially approached me with their hands near their weapons, clearly expecting trouble based on the call they'd received. The female deputy spoke first. "Sir, we need you to step away from the workers and keep your hands visible. We received a report about threatening behavior." "Officers, I understand why you're here, but the person who called you is the one committing crimes. She's trespassing and destroying my property. I'm the legal owner of this land." I slowly reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folder I always kept in my truck with important documents. Inside were copies of my driver's license, property deed, and the recent survey map with the iron stake markers clearly marked. The deputies examined the documents carefully. I could see their attitude shifting as they realized the situation wasn't what they'd been told. The male deputy walked over to my neighbor, who was still standing on her deck looking confident. "Ma'am, according to these documents, this gentleman appears to be the legal owner of the property where your construction is taking place. Do you have any documentation showing you have permission to build here?" Her confidence evaporated pretty quickly. She started talking about verbal agreements and how obvious it was that she should have access and how I was being unreasonable about a simple driveway. The deputies weren't buying any of it. "Ma'am, based on the evidence presented, you need to cease construction immediately. This appears to be a clear case of trespassing and property destruction. If you continue, criminal charges could be filed." The foreman had been listening to this whole exchange and immediately called his crew off. "We're done here," he told his workers. "Pack it up." Smart guy. He knew a lawsuit waiting to happen when he saw one, but the damage was already done. A 200-foot swath of my great-grandmother's meadow was torn up, scraped down to bare dirt. Decades of careful cultivation and natural growth destroyed in a single morning because some entitled woman decided she deserved a shortcut across my land. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with my lawyer, getting advice on how to proceed. He drafted a cease and desist letter and started preparing paperwork to demand full restoration costs. But I had a bigger plan forming in my mind. The destroyed area was right along the property line where my neighbor would have the best view from her house. She'd turned my beautiful meadow into an ugly brown scar, so I decided to make sure she got to look at something equally unpleasant every single day. I'd been thinking about expanding my heritage pig operation anyway. These weren't regular farm pigs. They were rare breeds that commanded premium prices from specialty restaurants. And pigs, well, pigs are messy, loud, and they smell. A lot. Over the next week, I had a crew come out and build a large, sturdy pig enclosure right up against the property line where the destroyed meadow was. I'm talking about a professional setup with proper fencing, feeding areas, and a big mud wallow where the pigs could cool off and do what pigs do best: make a mess. The location was perfect. The half-finished driveway that my neighbor had illegally started now led directly to a fence line with a pig pen on the other side. I even had a large wooden sign made that read "Heritage Swine Operation" and mounted it right where anyone coming down that aborted driveway would see it clearly. When the pigs arrived the following week, I made sure to choose the loudest, most active breeds I could find. Large black pigs and Gloucestershire old spots, both heritage breeds that love to root around in the mud and vocalize their opinions about everything. 24 pigs in total, and they settled right into their new home with enthusiasm. The timing couldn't have been better. My neighbor had started hosting fancy dinner parties on her back deck, trying to show off her country estate to her city friends. The first party after the pigs arrived was apparently quite memorable. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but sound carries in the country, and I could hear the complaints from her guests about the smell and noise coming from that awful pig farm next door. She called the police again, of course, complained about noise ordinances and health hazards and how the smell was making her sick. The deputies who responded were the same ones from the driveway incident. They took a quick look around, confirmed that the pigs were healthy and properly contained on my property, and explained that livestock operations were completely legal in our agricultural zone. Ma'am, he has every right to raise pigs on his farm. There's nothing we can do about the smell or noise as long as they're properly contained and cared for. Meanwhile, my lawyer was making progress on the restoration lawsuit. He'd gotten detailed quotes from environmental restoration specialists for rebuilding the wildflower meadow. Native wildflower restoration isn't cheap. It requires special soil preparation, specific seed mixes, and years of careful maintenance. The estimates came in at just over $15,000 for full restoration. My neighbor initially refused to pay anything, claiming she'd done nothing wrong. Her lawyer tried to argue that the damage was minimal and that I was overreacting. That strategy backfired when we provided the court with photos showing the before and after conditions, along with testimony from the restoration specialists about the value of mature native wildflower ecosystems. The case went to trial 6 months later. By then, the pig operation was in full swing, and my neighbor's property value had taken a significant hit. Real estate agents were having trouble showing her house because potential buyers were put off by the smell and constant pig noises coming from next door. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. We had the property deed, the survey showing the iron stake markers, photos of the damage, police reports from both incidents, and even testimony from the construction foreman who admitted he'd been hired to build on property his client didn't own. The judge wasn't sympathetic to my neighbor's claims that she'd acted in good faith. Ma'am, property ownership is a fundamental legal concept. You cannot simply decide to build on someone else's land because you find it convenient. The final judgment was even better than I'd hoped. She was ordered to pay the full $15,000 for meadow restoration, plus my legal fees, which had reached nearly $8,000. The judge also awarded punitive damages of another $10,000 for what he called willful and malicious destruction of property. The total bill was over $33,000, which apparently caused serious financial stress for my neighbors. I heard through the local grapevine that they'd been living beyond their means anyway, and the lawsuit settlement pushed them into real money trouble. The meadow restoration took almost a year, but it was worth every penny of her money. The specialist did an amazing job, and now the area looks even better than it did before. Native grasses and wildflowers are thriving, and I've even seen some rare butterfly species that weren't there before. The pigs, meanwhile, have become something of a local attraction. Kids from town love to come by and watch them root around in their pen. I've had several families ask if they can bring their children to see the heritage pigs, and it's turned into a nice little side business offering farm tours. My neighbors never did get their shortcut driveway. They're stuck with the long, winding route the original developer designed, which loops around several mature oak trees and takes them an extra 2 minutes to get home. From what I can see, they rarely use their back deck anymore, probably because the view now features a thriving pig operation instead of a scenic meadow. The final twist came about a year after the court judgment. My neighbors put their house up for sale, presumably because they couldn't afford to keep it after the lawsuit costs. But here's the thing about living next to a pig farm. It seriously impacts property values. Their McMansion sat on the market for 8 months with no serious offers. They finally sold it for about 30% less than what they'd paid for it originally. The new owners are a lovely farm family with 3 kids who think having heritage pigs next door is the coolest thing ever. They actually bought some breeding stock from me and started their own small operation on their property. Now we've got a proper farming community again instead of city folks trying to play country while destroying the actual countryside. Looking back on the whole mess, I learned some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself and the importance of having proper documentation. That survey I got when I inherited the farm turned out to be worth every penny. Without those iron stakes and official measurements, the whole situation could have gone very differently. I also learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting creative. My neighbor wanted a shortcut across my property, and she ended up with a front row seat to a pig pen. She tried to destroy something beautiful that had been in my family for generations, and instead she got to pay for making it even more beautiful while listening to pig noises every morning with her coffee. The heritage pig operation has grown into a significant part of my farm income now. Those 24 pigs have multiplied into a breeding program that supplies rare genetics to farms across 3 states. The restaurant customers loved the story behind the pork they're serving, especially the part about how the pig farm started as revenge against an entitled neighbor who tried to steal farmland. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to my former neighbors, the financial stress, having to sell their dream house at a loss, all of that. Honestly, I don't feel bad at all. They made a conscious choice to destroy my property because they thought they could get away with it. They figured some farmer wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against city folks with money and lawyers. They were wrong on all counts. I had the resources, the legal documentation, and the creativity to make sure they faced real consequences for their actions. More importantly, I protected something that had been in my family for nearly a century and turned their destructive act into something that actually improved my farm operation. The wildflower meadow is more beautiful than ever, blooming every spring with colors that take your breath away. The heritage pigs are happy and healthy, rooting around in their pen and producing some of the finest pork in the region. And every morning when I walk out to check on the animals, I can see across the fence to where my former neighbor used to stand on her deck, trying to enjoy country life while destroying the very things that made it special. Now that deck belongs to a farm family who appreciates the land and understands that being good neighbors means respecting each other's property and way of life. The kids come over sometimes to help with feeding the pigs, and they're learning valuable lessons about agriculture and responsibility. It's funny how things work out sometimes. My neighbor thought she was taking a shortcut to make her life easier, but instead she ended up taking the long way around to losing everything she thought she wanted. Meanwhile, her illegal driveway attempt led me to discover a more profitable use for that part of my land, and gave me a great story to tell at farmers markets and agricultural conferences. The moral of the story is pretty simple. Don't mess with people's property, especially when it's been in their family for generations. And if you do decide to bulldoze someone's land without permission, make sure you're prepared for the consequences. Sometimes those consequences involve a lot more than just paying for the damage you caused. They involve waking up every morning to the sound of heritage pigs enjoying their breakfast, looking out your window at a thriving farm operation, and knowing that your own greed and entitlement led directly to everything you're now forced to live with. Some lessons are more expensive than others, but they tend to stick better when you've paid the full price for learning them. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Back in the before times when the internet was still a new thing with lots of potential, I was enrolled at my local junior college. A little into the semester, I moved in with my girlfriend so we could both save on rent. I will call my girlfriend Lucy for the purposes of this post. One night, Lucy says she invited a friend from one of her classes for a game night. Sounded good to me. We invited a couple of other friends, and it was a really fun night. Surprisingly, it turned out her friend, Sarah, was someone I knew from high school. We weren't close friends, but we knew each other and got along fine. After that night, Sarah was invited over pretty frequently for dinner, game nights, or to watch a movie. She even brought her boyfriend over a couple of times. I'll call him Jay, but he never quite fit in. He would be quiet and/or standoffish, wouldn't engage much, and just seemed like he never wanted to be there. It was clear no one really felt comfortable having him there, but we invited him to be polite to Sarah. Fortunately, he only came over 2 or 3 times and found an excuse to refuse every other time. A month or 2 after this all started, Sarah called my GF crying and asked if she could come over. Of course we said yes. The story that was relayed was Jay was getting very upset with Sarah for coming over to our place so frequently and accused her of cheating on him. She never clarified if he thought she was cheating with me, Lucy, or both, but any option was ridiculous and never happened. But he confronted her and started verbally assaulting her, calling her all kinds of nasty names. At one point, she tried to walk past him to leave, and he shoved her back. This caused her to trip over a coffee table, fall, and get a huge bruise on her butt and lower back. Lucy told me about the bruises Sarah had shown her. I didn't see it for myself. Sarah swore up and down that he had never physically assaulted her before, and she believed it was just an accident, but I was pissed. I wanted revenge. You don't mess with my friends, and you don't assault women. I wanted to beat the crap out of him, but while I'm a very big guy, I've never been in a fight and am not a violent person, but a revenge plan formed in my mind. At the time, I was working in the administration building of the school as a student employee. As part of my job, I could access anyone's student records, their fees, and their class schedule. The date was fast approaching. That was the last possible day to drop or add classes without penalty or specific permission. So I looked Jay up in the system, got his student ID number and the other information that I needed, and put my plan into motion. On the last day, to change schedules, I used the dedicated enrollment phones in the administration building. Internet class scheduling wasn't a thing that was set up yet, and canceled all of his classes. Not only that, but I went through and added every class I could find that had a course fee. If you owed a debt at the school, you couldn't get copies or your transcripts or anything else, Something that I didn't mention was that Jay was a foreign student and couldn't stay in the country if he wasn't enrolled with a certain number of units. I wish I could give more info about the fallout, but as I didn't want to get this traced back to me, I didn't tell anyone, nor did I pull up his records again for quite a while. I did get a little payoff, though. Sarah was really worried about seeing him again. She had broken up with him the night after he pushed her, as they had an English class together on Tuesdays. She said that on Tuesday he was there, but there was also someone new standing in the class. He was standing because there weren't enough seats. The teacher, seeing that there were more people than should be held roll, and guess who wasn't on it? You're right, it was Jay. Apparently, after I dropped all his classes, someone on the wait list got in. Jay tried to argue with the teacher, but as Teach had the official class roster and Jay wasn't on it, there was nothing he could do. Sarah said she never saw Jay in that class again. I don't know much more about what happened. Lucy and I eventually broke up, so I didn't see Sarah very often after that. After a while, I did look up Jay's class schedule, and all of the classes with course fees were gone, but he didn't have any other classes on the books either. I wanted to assume he was kicked out of school, but I didn't try to confirm it. Either way, Sarah didn't have to have a class with him, and while he probably deserved more, he was definitely inconvenienced and possibly kicked out of school. Sometimes I worry I was too harsh, but then I remember that he deserved it. Mess with me, but not my friends. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This goes back about 10 years ago. Worked for a large telecommunications company as a call center supervisor. Most of my peers were smokers, and with the way schedules were set up, there were large chunks of the day where only 2 or 3 of us were on at the same time. Our manager insisted one of us always be visible on the call center floor while also performing our regular duties. Performance reviews, call monitoring, escalations, and weekly 1S with our team. I also had the largest team with consistently over 20 reporting to me. All this to set the stage. I noticed that I seemed to be the only supervisor actually doing my time being visible, but every time I tried to carve out an hour or two for the rest of my job, they were always out smoking. It got to the point that I was working after hours just to stay caught up. I brought it up to my manager thinking she would discreetly monitor it. She didn't. Instead, in a supervisor meeting, she announced to the entire group that she knows we have a busy job and sometimes it seems imbalanced, understatement, but that really the smokers were just taking their lunch hour in short smoke break intervals instead, so it all worked out in the end. Cool. The next day, I came to work with a pack of cigarettes in my bag ready to go. The second I saw one of my peers going out to smoke, I went out with them. Timing the breaks. Lit cigarette in my hand the entire time. It was a revolving door. They were going out to smoke almost more than once an hour and usually out there for a solid 20 minutes each time. By the end of the first day doing this, I had timed one supervisor at nearly 2 hours worth of smoking breaks. I well exceeded my own lunch hour, so I started doing it every day. Packed small snacks to munch while out instead of taking my entire lunch. One day my manager saw me heading out and seemed surprised. I just shrugged and said, yeah, I decided to start smoking. She couldn't say anything because if she timed mine, she would have to time theirs as well. This went on for roughly a month before she announces to our management team that we would be required to start coordinating breaks among the team to make sure we had coverage. I gained not only the well-earned smugness from ruining things for all my lazy peers, but also a bit of relief from constantly floor walking. The next one is an entitled people story. So a few years ago, I briefly worked in a screen printing factory. It was located in a business plaza next to a bunch of other factories and whatnot, so the parking lot was shared by all the businesses. It was a decently sized parking lot. Even when it was full, there were still plenty of spaces. So anyway, at the time I was driving my mom's old car. Wasn't the worst, but wasn't the best either. Just something to get to and from. One day, during our lunch break, I tried to start my car, and it was dead. I was irritated, but it didn't really affect anything. One of my coworkers lived near me, so he was able to give me a lift home. I didn't have anywhere else to be besides there and home, so I wasn't worried about being without a car for a day or two. I talked to my boss about leaving it there overnight till I could figure out a time to get it towed, and he had no problem with it. The next morning, my boss walks up to me and jokes that my car trouble is causing drama. Turns out, my car was parked in the spot that one of the employees at one of the neighboring businesses liked to park at. In his exact words, it was the guy's favorite spot. Don't ask me why. I've spent many sleepless nights wondering how or why someone could have a favorite parking spot. I've heard of people who grow romantic attachments to buildings and vehicles, but never a parking spot. I felt bad about it because I like to respect people's feelings, but my boss told me not to worry about it, so I didn't. The guy worked at one of the businesses my boss didn't like, so he honestly found it all sort of funny. His main concern was not having to put up with the dude, so he just wanted me to get it taken care of before he whined anymore. It's also worth mentioning that this spot had no signs. It wasn't marked as reserved, had no names labeled on it, or a handicapped spot. It wasn't even under a tree or anywhere near one of the building entrances. Literally just a parking spot. There was nothing beneficial about parking your car there, besides parking your ducking car there. Then it comes time to go home. We all clock out and people are crowded around the windows. There's about 3 or 4 cop cars outside and one guy frantically talking to one of the officers. We're here thinking someone got hurt or robbed, something terrible enough for a bunch of cops to show up and block all our cars in. The bystander effect was in full effect, but nope. Parking spot dude was so upset about not being able to park his car in his beloved spot for one day, barely 12 hours, that he called the police and reported my vehicle as suspicious and was trying to have it impounded. It's not every day where I feel bad for police officers, but man, the cop that he was whining to looked beyond over his crap. He looked like an extremely annoyed father dealing with an unruly toddler, which was even funnier because he looked about half the parking spot guy's age. So I walk up, and the dude immediately points at me and goes, "That's him, that's his car," acting like I was America's Most Wanted, and I'm gonna be honest, I got a little nervous. I have priors, cops don't entirely like me, I don't entirely like having to talk to cops. And now some man Karen is pointing me out to a group of officers, but the cop casually walks up to me and just asks me the standard questions. I show him my license, proving the car was mine and it's legit and all that, and I explain how the battery's dead and was just waiting for a good time to have it towed. He was chill as hell with me, honestly. Well, parking spot dude was not pleased with the cop's chillness. In fact, he was quite offended. He's hovering around trying to listen in on our conversation. I don't know exactly what he was hoping would happen, but he slowly realized that it was going the exact opposite of his wishes. He butts in going, "Aren't you going to give him a ticket? Can't he be arrested for this?" Just desperately trying to take control of the situation and find some way to make my life miserable, and the cop just sighs and goes, "Sir, it's not illegal to have a dead battery," and was about to give a lecture on what's illegal before parking spot dude just goes full-blown Karen mode, stamping his feet, screeching about police being corrupt bastards. The usual grief from someone not having their way. We all just stand there watching this grown man throw a temper tantrum, and he finally realizes that nobody cares about him and his precious parking spot, so he just storms off back into the building. I'm sure all his co-workers got to hear all about it. The cops eventually leave. They don't even write down my info or anything. It was obvious from the get-go that they didn't give a crap about me and my car. They pulled up expecting a big bust, and all they got was a kid with car trouble and a toddler trapped in an old man's body. I was kind of disappointed they didn't arrest him or give him a fine, but you can't have everything. As relieved as I was super embarrassed to have all that happen in front of everyone, but they were all just blown away by how the dude was acting. I was hoping to have my car dealt with that day, since it was close to the weekend, but out of spite, I kept it there another day or two. I later found out the dude ended up losing his job over the whole ordeal, between getting the police involved and presumably making it everyone's problem. I could only imagine how done they all were with him. He seemed like a joy to be around. My boss thought it was the funniest crap ever and never lived it down. He loved to joke about getting me arrested for coming in late because of course he did. Bosses have the same sense of humor as dads. I eventually left that job for bigger and better things and got a new car that doesn't spontaneously crap out on me, but man, I'll never forget about parking spot dude and the massive injustice he suffered because of me. I'm sure he's doing well, if even still alive. Anyway, thank you for watching.